Today I want to look at a couple of books by the greatest Taiwanese comic book artist of all time, Chen Uen. It looks like his name is Chen Uen, but that's just the funniness of the romanization. But Chen Uen was a Taiwanese comic artist. He started his comic career in 1983 with Warrior Panther. Before that, he was an interior designer. We're also going to look at this Magical Super Asia. I have issue number 5. This series started in 1993. I think this probably came out a couple of years after that. So there's a 10 to 15 year gap between these two books. So I think it's an interesting overview of his development. And at the end, I'm going to look at a few of his painted works too, which for me are really mind-blowingly good. This was his first stuff, like I said. And his early works, especially, I think the panel layout and his page design really stands out as really fascinating and extremely effective. Right off the bat, this is like one of his first published pages, and you can see doing some interesting work here with the shape of the panels, this kind of repetition. Interesting here, I noticed this. This looks like the National Palace Museum in Taipei. And that's actually the first place I became aware of his work. So he was the very first comic book artist ever to be exhibited in the National Palace Museum, which is, it was originally for all of the old Chinese treasures that were brought over here by the Chinese nationalists during the Civil War. But they have regular art exhibitions now. I've seen Picasso and Escher there, but Chen Uen was shown there, and it was a big deal because it was kind of, a further legitimization of comic book art, which I've always thought is fine art. But that's another discussion for another video. See, like this, loading all his panels on the left and just leaving this big white space on the right here. I've been trying to figure out how he can make such busy pages and have them feel not cluttered, have them read clearly. And I wonder if it has to do with his use of white space. A lot of like negative space, and things are very clearly grouped. Also, when he uses a lot of these screen tones and a lot of gray, and when he uses them, they kind of read almost as flat value, even though there's a lot of texture inside. So I think that might have something to do with it. A lot of dynamic action on all of his pages. He's really truly a master of composition. See some more of that later on in the paintings as well. So I imagine he was influenced by manga, which was always been big in Taiwan, and so his chapters all start with these like beautiful painted pages. I think is a common thing in a lot of manga. Have a few pages of color stuff and then have the black and white afterwards. And apparently he was also quite popular in Japan and also in Hong Kong. Maybe the first Taiwanese comic artist to be well known outside of Taiwan. He does a lot of this, like, you have this kind of very regular, very, very gridded out page. Then we'll go to something more like this, kind of diagonal action. I think Scott McCloud would call this maybe moment to moment. I think that's what it is. And tons of speed lines, but not overwhelming. Always in the service of the composition. I love the like white stippling on top of that. I don't know if that's white ink or maybe if that's a screen tone or something, but I'm a total sucker for stippling of any kind, and he used a lot of it in here. And already you can see the work getting more refined. This is 87 pages in, and I love seeing the development of comic book artists. Like I really like it when I pick up an issue 1 of something, and then by issue 5, the art style is maybe not completely different, but evolved. I love seeing the evolution. I think that's one of the wonderful things about comic art that a lot of other art forms don't have, is that you can see the artist's evolution on the page as they go. And at least as a creator, to me that really is a benefit. I don't know if maybe that's a turnoff to other people, but I love how we have these like really painterly rendered panels here, and then this more like flat, more comic book style of holding line coloring on the sides here. It's a really interesting touch. So he does a lot of formal experimentation. We'll see more of that later on. I think this volume came with a poster of that. So I have two of his posters up in my studio, and this is one of them. So that's Warrior Panther. There's a little bit of back matter here if you read traditional Mandarin, and I love the pictures here of the original magazines that that they appeared in. Kind of, especially this one here, kind of capturing an era. I like the aesthetic of 1980s Taiwan. There's something about it that I just find you know, very attractive. Lettering here, all of that. These were published by Dala Press, and so they have a lot of his books here, publication. And Dala Press, you can tell because you looked for the little sperm. That's how you know, at least here in Taiwan. They've published a lot of Mobius books in Mandarin, and also some Milo Manara and Vittorio Giardino. So they on their website they tout themselves as publishing graphic novels, sex and gender, and gourmet, like food-based comics. So it's an interesting mix, but it's a really good publisher. I might do a video on them at some point. Very thankful for their efforts in reprinting a lot of European comics and a lot of these older Taiwanese comics. So this is 10 or so years later, and you can see like quite a difference. At least here he's abandoned some of that busy page layout. I don't know if that's to do with time or for clarity or what, but this like really refined kind of line and the variation of line is something that jumps out at me as being different here. Also these textures, kind of spatter and grittiness. A lot of work in this with like this really dense repetition and kind of patterning. That really ambitious drawings in here. And so I think maybe in his early work, I would categorize that as really ambitious page layouts. And in this, I would maybe categorize it more as ambitious drawing. At all of that. And again, he really loads it in with texture, with line, and yet it all reads really clearly. So his composition, his focal point especially, I think. Look at that. It's just pretty wild. His formal experimentation. It's really inspiring stuff looking through the. Here we have this white figure here, and showing the depth with this screen tone, getting kind of. There's a foreground, a middle ground, another middle ground, and a background in this one, and it's all very simply executed. It's really dynamic on every page. He also did a lot of stuff in game design after his comic work. I think after this came out, he had a video game for PlayStation. I think the original PlayStation called Chen Uen's Three Kingdoms, which I was unfamiliar with before doing the research for the video. But it's pretty interesting that he had a whole game based upon his creations. And he went on to do a lot of other video game work in recent years. Unfortunately, he passed away quite young in his 50s, I think, in 2017 or 2018. So they had that exhibition at the National Palace Museum posthumously. I think his students made it happen. And who could deny have giving this guy that kind of an exhibition? Here's some more of that, like just going for it. Just this flower pattern repeating, and it gets just smaller and smaller and smaller as we go back. Every single one is in there. So I'm gonna look at, let me see, some more of his paintings. I love that they included some of these in here. See the brush strokes, the application of media. The difference between this figure and this figure here. It wouldn't have. I don't know where your head would have to be to decide to paint this like this and this like that. And I don't know what the storyline is. To me, it looks like maybe this is you know something that was possessed and the spirit is coming out of it, or something like a shell or a husk. And then this kind of map in the background, this like kind of a Ming dynasty, or Qing dynasty rather, painting. So here's some more of the volumes of his work from Dala, which means big spicy or very spicy in Mandarin, and I guess maybe that has to do with some of their content, the Milo Manara stuff. So I'm gonna look at some of his paintings, and I got the painting I'm gonna show from two different websites. So the first group is from this article on Taiwan Panorama, and I'm gonna link this in the description. I'll also link Dala Publishing as well for anybody who's interested. But first of all, this one here, I mean, talk about dynamic. This crazy movement of this robe, knife here, prominently framed, and every single face here is different. And we get like less kind of refined as we get to the edge of the page, and as we get closer to the middle, kind of more and more, until they're starting to paint some of these faces. I love this white kind of aura, adding the focal point around him. I guess he must have gone on there with white. He would get the transparency and the opaqueness at the same time, all in traditional media. And something about this gives a kind of a Frank Miller feel too. This one, this poster came with one of his books, and this is another one that's on the wall in my studio. But talk about a composition. We have, the top third is this white shape, bottom third is sort of almost a white shape, but the middle here, where the action is, dark piece in the background framing the kind of white, highly rendered horse, like tension in there, all the muscles, the veins. And then everything is cool except for this figure, or the two figures. And the guts to just make this brush stroke in this shape. I don't know. I feel like I guess he would have had to have painted in that background first, and then gone on and done this brush stroke, and then maybe put the figure on. And I don't know how many backgrounds I would have to paint before I got that brush stroke just so. Too many. But the confidence to pull that off is really impressive. It's the action. And then going in with all the little details. It's really, really brilliant. And one more from the Taiwan Panorama side. This is an interesting one. This, talk about his formal experimentation. This is a plastic bag, just crumpled and affixed to the painting. Gives a really, I don't know, really tactile, sculptural, dynamic feel to this piece. Another bold decision. And a few more that we're going to look at come from this website here. This is Initium Media. So he was one of the first, and maybe the first Taiwanese artist to incorporate a traditional Chinese painting into his works, and like this ink painting. And this figure just being described by this almost this calligraphic brushwork. Another an audacious decision. And then a more kind of traditional kind of painting, figure painting in the background and for the face here. But that's really amazing. I love this. I can't believe that this could be pulled off. Here's another one, kind of composition. Like we have a clear focal point here, and we have the secondary focal point of the flaming buildings. We don't see the eyes, but we can see the direction that they're looking, and we have this kind of corridor of action going on, and this is framed by these banners. And I was looking at this trying to think, like, this is all warms, but in this context, I feel like maybe the red becomes the cool, the yellows become the warm, the yellows and the oranges here in the fire. And one last one. What can I even say about this? Again, he's breaking the composition up. At the bottom is just this wild spattering, but because of these red spots on the helmets here, like on first glance, this reads as just a crowd, even though it doesn't make any sense spatially. To me, this seems like just a mass of people in kind of motion. Up top is this swaying kind of flowing sky, banners, kind of implying a storm coming maybe. We have this pillar that's really highly rendered with light and shadow, very structural, leading to this figure who is also quite highly rendered compared to these, maybe more impressionistic, and then pointing up to our main figure in the background here, who is have this white shape, these flowing robes. All these little red things are pointing up at him. This triangle here is pointing up, framed by this figure, this form here. Piece. It's really, I mean, it's a tour de force. That this guy is in the National Palace Museum for a reason, and I love his work so much. And so I hope that his work can be more widely known and more appreciated outside of Taiwan and Japan and Hong Kong. The brilliant comic art and paintings of Chen Uen, Taiwan's greatest comic artist. I don't know the availability of these outside of Taiwan, but like I said, they are published by Dala. I'll link them in the description. And look for the little sperm. That's what I always do when I go to the bookstore. Every time I see one of these, anything that they put out, I snatch it up because it is always good stuff. I hope you enjoyed his work. If you are Taiwanese or if you know more about Chen Uen and Taiwanese comics than I do, please let me know in the comments if you have any links to any sites that you think would be helpful or useful, or any anecdotes from growing up with his work. Please do let me know. And thanks for watching.